Yes.
Good evening. I'm Bobby Mark. I'm the president of the AAUW branch of Beaver Dam. And I'm going to start with the most important announcement of the evening. Restrooms are located, there's one unisex restroom behind the green door, right over there. And then there's two larger restrooms, just one floor down out these doors and to the right. And there's also of course, there's also the elevator. And there's also a drinking fountain next to the bathrooms, one floor down. So if you're looking for those important items, that's where they are. Wow. Thanks to all of you for coming. We are so pleased with the turnout. When this was first proposed way last spring, we thought it was a great idea, but we did not know what kind of response we would get, and we are very, very happy that all of you decided to join us this evening for our community dialogue on racism and cultural prejudice. By the way, just a happy coincidence, today, September 21st, is designated as the United Nations International Day of Peace, and this year their theme is End Racism, Build Peace. So I wish we could say we planned it that way, but it just was luck. So. I'm proud to lead our local chapter of AAUW. AAUW is a national organization which works globally to support their mission of promoting gender equity for women and girls through education, research, and advocacy. AAUW has been on the cutting edge of the fight for gender equity for 141 years. They started in 1881, so pretty impressive. Since their beginnings, they've given over $100 million in scholarships and grants to deserving young women, both for college and graduate schools and research projects. They've supported dozens of gender discrimination cases in state and federal courts. They've published hundreds of scientific reports on topics related to women and their families. And they have been key supporters in the passage of historic and major legislation related to gender equity, including such things as the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Title IX back in 1972, and the Family and Medical Leave Act in 1993, as just a short list of the legislation that they've played a role in. Our local chapter of AAUW here in Beaver Dam, we've only been around for 89 years. Our first local meeting was in 1933 at the Hotel Rogers. In the last 10 years alone, our branch has given over $60,000 in scholarships to local high school seniors and women returning to MPTC. We've also sponsored hundreds of educational programs and social events, such as this one. If you're interested in joining us or would just like more information about AAUW, we have a display and some brochures down in the lobby. There's a table there. AAUW, the national organization, the state organization, and our local organization, we all have Facebook pages and websites. So if you just Google AAUW.org for national, or AAUW Wisconsin, or AAUW Beaver Dam, your browser will take you there. By the way, guys, I just want to let you know, men have been allowed in AAUW since 1987. So we would be thrilled to have you join us. Okay. AAUW Beaver Dam, we're proud to kick off our fall programs with tonight's discussion about racism and cultural prejudice. Before we begin, I want to thank Annette Camps, along with Ellen Sushak, you guys, why don't you stand up, Margaret Furtick, Lori Degner, and Andrea Utree. These ladies make up our local AAUW Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee, and the summer read and this entire program is all theirs, so they deserve all the credit. I would also like to thank the Beaver Dam Area Community Theater, who have so generously allowed us to use their beautiful facility. Thank you, David. In addition, I'd like to thank our panel members who graciously are sharing their time and experiences with us. So, I'd also like to thank our moderator, Craig Warmbold. Craig is the News and Operations Director with Good Karma Brands, WBEV 95.3 FM, Daily Dodge, and 1430 ESPN Beaver Dam. He graduated with a bachelor's degree in communications from Southern Illinois University at Carbondale, and he lives in Beaver Dam with his wife and 2 children. Hailing from Chicago, Craig grew up appreciating the benefits that come with cultural diversity in a big city. Living in Beaver Dam for 16 years, he has come to learn that while the cultural diversity may be less robust in smaller communities, it is no less important and valued. Craig says, and I quote, "I am honored to be given the opportunity to act as facilitator for this panel and look forward to the inevitable discoveries that come with constructive reflecting on our shared experience on this planet we all call home." Finally, I'd like to set the tone for tonight's discussion with a quote from the book Portraits of Peace by John Noltner. John, a noted author, photographer, and peace activist, is a BD native and a Beaver Dam High School graduate. In his book, he writes, "The voices that want to divide are loud. The ones who want to unite must not be silent in the face of it. That doesn't necessarily mean we need to out-yell the others, but it does mean that we need to consistently show up for one another and uphold the values of connection, community, and the common good. It is our responsibility, and it's up to each one of us to recognize our own ability to respond." Thank you. And Craig?
Thank you for that, Bobby, and good evening, and welcome to a dialogue with our community about racism and cultural prejudice, presented by the American Association of University Women, and thank you, and on behalf of those of us at WBEV and Daily Dodge and ESPN Beaver Dam, and our parent company, Good Karma Brands, I want you to know this is something that is very important to us where I work, and we are honored to somehow be some part of this today. And thank you, AAUW, and thank all of you for coming out this evening. Today's program is, again, sponsored by the AAUW. I want to take a moment to read the purpose of the program in the words of the Beaver Dam AAUW Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. Quote, "Many efforts are already underway to understand and reduce racism and cultural prejudice in the Beaver Dam area. The AAUW Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee invited about 24 organizations and some key people who are already active in these efforts to participate in this public dialogue using the book So You Want to Talk About Race by Ijeoma Oluo as a springboard. Our purpose is to increase our community's awareness and foster cooperative efforts to address racism wherever it may exist." And a note, the panel here has read the book, So You Want to Talk About Race, but it's not going to be required reading. It's suggested and highly recommended, but to be part of today's panel, it is certainly not something that you have needed to have read to be able to participate. So what do we mean by dialogue? A dialogue is a forum that draws participants from as many parts of the community as possible to exchange information just like this, face to face, share personal stories and experiences, honestly express perspectives, clarify viewpoints, and develop solutions to community concerns. The dialogue leader's role is to facilitate the dialogue and administer basically the goal of what we have here today, which is to try to work toward a safe, accepting environment for everyone. A quick note, we are videotaping tonight's program, just this panel portion of the program. Nobody from the audience will be on the video. It's just the members of the panel here who have agreed to the conversation. And then you will be able to watch back, share this program on social media by going to our website, dailydodge.com. So at this point, we want to ask each of our panelists here if they would introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about their role in the community. And I wasn't given any direction on this, so I will maybe just go down the line here, starting to my immediate right.
Hi, I'm Laura Gorell. I manage the Habitat for Humanity Restore, and I have a couple of community outreaches that extend out of the Restore Playground movement, and food is free. My husband and I moved here in '98. We brought with us 2 brown children, and we also have 2 non-brown children. We've made Beaver Dam home, and I look forward to us moving forward with our diversity, equity, inclusion.
Hi, I'm Danette Mockmiller. I live in Mayville. I have lived there all my life, mostly. And
I'm the dialogue leader, so that's okay.
I am on this panel because I joined the racial justice group in Beaver Dam, and they asked me to be a part of it.
Hello, I'm Betsy Ramsdale. I am from Waukesha originally, but I moved to Beaver Dam. This will be my 15th year. I work for the school district. I am married, and we have a 10th grader and a senior, 2 dogs and a bird. I ran for city council once and lost, which is fine because then I moved wards. I was the BDA president for 2 years. Now I am their past president. I am a new member to the AAUW, and I am a new board member of the Playground Movement. Oh, and in the school district, I'm the Bilingual Family Liaison, which means I work with the Spanish-speaking families, making sure their students get their needs met at school and making sure the families understand how our school system works.
Good evening, I'm Rob Meyer. I am the Director of Teaching and Learning for the Beaver Dam Unified School District, which is why I prompted Betsy to share her role. I won't do that all night, I promise. I kind of promise. Watch
I
under
have
the
to
table.
do what
Yeah.
the boss says.
So I grew up in northern Wisconsin, a small town called Monaco, right outside of Rhinelander. If you've missed it, it's where highways 8 and 45 intersect. There's about 249 of us, 250 after I left. And made my way to Stevens Point. I've lived in Sun Prairie or Madison since that point, but I've worked for the Waupun Area School District after a teaching career in Sun Prairie, and this is my 3rd year serving as a Director of Teaching and Learning for the Beaver Dam Unified School District. Another hat I wear is I'm the organization president for Wisconsin ASCD, which is the Curriculum and Instruction Professionals Association in Wisconsin. And Mayor Becky also asked me to serve, waving at me in the back, on the DEI task force. So I don't know which of those reasons I'm here, but I was invited, I'm sure, for one of those reasons, and I'm excited to participate in this dialogue.
Welcome. Thank you. My name is John Kreitzer. I'm the police chief for Beaver Dam. I've been born and raised in Beaver Dam. I've been in law enforcement for 32 years. I've been the police chief for 8 years. My job is to lead all the employees and keep you safe. And my main job is to set the culture of the department at the current time and then the future. So.
Good evening. My name is Leslie Laster. I'm the Director for Diversity, Accessibility, and Support Services at Marine Park Technical College, which means I cover all things DEI, our counselors, and accommodations and accessibility for students who have different needs to be successful. So I want to say thank you for your scholarship that you provide to our students. That's amazing. I am not from Wisconsin. I'm actually a Yooper, if you know what that is. So I'm from Iron Mountain, Michigan, and I moved to Sheboygan, Wisconsin, where I went to college, and I've never left. So I have a little bit of a commute this evening, but I do cover all 3 campuses at Marine Park, and therefore I'm involved in community events in all 3 areas as well.
I'm Alicia Baruden. I did grow up in Beaver Dam. I graduated from Wayland and then went to Marquette to pursue a degree in anthropology where I focus on sociocultural anthropology and race in the United States. I went on and did research for Marquette, psychological-based research on African American women in Milwaukee. I continue to be a part of this research team. I'm also the director of education for a daycare center in Milwaukee. And I have organized Black Lives Matter protests in Milwaukee and around Dodge County.
I'm Alicia Baruden. I am her proud mother. But I am a Puerto Rican woman from Brooklyn, New York, and I went to high school in Chicago. We moved here in 2004, so we've been here a long time now, and my career is as an HR director, and so diversity and equity and inclusion have been wrapped into my career, where I've been for over 25 years. But I think, to be frank with everyone here, that I am here because of my daughter, because I've seen what has happened in the past several years. My family, my Puerto Rican family in New York, I've always been aware of racism, and having seen the emboldenedness of racists now, and that it's been traumatizing, where I know what my mother and my grandmother and my father went through, but to see that as a mother and to experience it through my daughter's lens has been extremely painful. And I have to admit, I've been very vocal in our community and very active, and the past couple of years I'm pretty much quiet off of social media because it's been painful. So I'm here as a mother-daughter duet, and I don't think I would be here if it wasn't for my daughter's courage.
Thank you, and thank all of you for participating tonight. And I'm not going to just go left to right. I'm going to change that up here from time to time. And Alicia, if you could maybe build off that, the kind of setting the stage here with a question that we'll be asking everybody, and that is basically, why is this dialogue important to you? I think you laid the foundation for that in your opening statements, but if you could take a moment and maybe elaborate on that idea just a bit.
Yeah, I have to say, as a BIPOC woman, I mean, this is important because we live it every day. Whether it's the fear of something happening to my daughter or my family, our friends, my daughter's friends. I have 3 daughters, and so they have an expansive, extended family. It is true fear and anger. There have been times that, for me, that, like I mentioned, that I've pulled back from some of my community activism, a lot of it, because I didn't know if it was worth even engaging in a conversation, or just protecting my family became the most important thing. So I'm here in hopes that our community can hear and feel that this isn't a blame game. This is we need to save ourselves game. As humans and as a community, I would love to be able to know that my daughter can walk into a grocery store without being followed, without being looked at. I would hope that my grandchildren aren't told that their hair is ugly or that their skin is dirty. So this is an effort for me to try to bridge that, and I hope it falls on open ears.
Ariana, what are your thoughts about that? And what are your thoughts about this dialogue? Why is it important to you?
Well, growing up here, as my mom has hinted, was very difficult. I would have been the second person of any color to ever graduate from the school I had been in Waupun, right? And I was always the only person of color in all these milieus or all these spaces that I entered, and due to that, I faced a lot of overt microaggressions, subliminal, all the forms of racism to be had, right? But I think this conversation, I want to be here because it's not only important to uplift Black voices and being a Black woman myself and getting my voice out there, but I want to hear from the other panelists. I want to engage with the community, and I believe that it is engaging and sharing and being open and being honest with ourselves that we can begin to bridge this gap. But the other thing about racism is that it's institutionalized. So as long as we are trying to address racism in ourselves, that's great and that's necessary, but we really have to dig deep into what the structures are that form our institutions, that form healthcare, education, policing, judicial systems, every institution of the United States of America, right? And so, yeah, I want to begin because this is a multi-tiered, multi-milieued issue. That discussion is one way we can begin to unpack this.
Leslie, why is this dialogue important to you?
So the first thing I want to say is some of you might be hearing vocabulary that you don't understand. So what I would encourage you to do, if you have pen and paper, to use your phone to write it down and ask later if you don't know. As an educator, I guess I'm always just thinking that, and in order to bridge the gap, I want you to understand the language that we're using. Those of us that live it and are in the field, it just comes very naturally. The reason I'm here is because anytime there's an opportunity to speak to people that want to hear, I'm assuming that's why you came today, then we're one step closer to solving a problem. The biggest problem in the United States, in my opinion, and I want to state also that I'm speaking from my professional experience and my personal experiences, I don't represent every woman of color with what I'm sharing today, is we're so polarized. I don't think people think for themselves anymore. We hear one thing, we believe it. We watch it on TV, we believe it. And we associate people with everybody with those things. And so it's really important to me that what's said here stays here and what's learned here leaves here. You know, that you are really here to make a difference. I was looking at the questions, and this is impactful for such a small community. I live in Sheboygan, and we've never done anything like this. That may change after tonight, but you know. And so I think it's really important, and I really liked what you said about, you know, this isn't about a blame game, but this is real stuff. I have 3 beautiful brown boys, and a husband and brothers, and I do get emotional because I do worry about their safety more than mine. Sometimes, but I do. Those are things that I have a fear of every time my 23-year-old goes to a party, right, or drives somewhere he's not familiar with. Those are real things for me, and again, it's not a blame, but it's real, and we want you not just to feel it, but to be representatives, to speak out against it. So that's why I'm here.
Chief Kreitzer, John,
Well,
why is this dialogue important to you?
I just don't know how we can function and solve anything without dialogue, and so I look at it as a lot of things, and to get off on several topics, I just think it's many things. I think that's how you deliver information. I think that's how you drive actions. I think that's how you move forward and move forward faster with dialogue. I think you open and enhance connections with people. You draw in conversations. I think you have clearer understanding among people when you do that. You bring in them people, they're more invested in the conversation like I am today. I think it builds stronger relations and it improves and exchanges ideas and opinions, and we could go on. So to me, it's a variety of things that, to me, as to why it's an important when you have an organization of 60 to 70 employees, there has to be that constant dialogue all the time and constantly talking about all the things we just talked about. So,
Rob?
So I think no matter where we are in different, political parties and different perspectives, experiences in our lives, I don't know that any of us could really agree that we're living in the world that we want to live in, that we've arrived at any sort of destination. And I think that this dialogue is an important step for this community, and wherever people go after this, to maybe carry something with them to get closer to that. In addition, I don't have the same experiences as some other people on this panel, as you might tell from my autobiography at the beginning when I introduced myself. So I think this is important for me as well, because I'm here not only just to give some perspective on the panel, but to listen, learn, and reflect myself and carry that forward. And the third thing for me professionally is that my responsibility and my job is to ensure that every student that enters the school district is able to achieve high levels of learning and do what they wish to afterwards. And currently in the education systems across the country, Wisconsin, locally, our data doesn't show that. It shows gaps in that. In fact, Wisconsin has the largest achievement gap in the country for students of color. It's close to that largest gap for students with disabilities. So I need to participate in this to be able to better myself, because my job is to help remedy that. And I'll say there's some educators in the room. It's not because of poorly intentioned people. It's because we need to look at policies, practices, we need to reflect, and come together to take action. And again, this is a part of that.
Betsy.
Yes, well, I look at everything, well, not everything. I mean, I'm a white woman, right? So I have not as many problems as other people. But in my work, I have bias maybe toward Hispanic, Latino families and the problems that they go through and the fears that they have. And there are things that I know they don't tell me. And then when they do feel comfortable telling me, then I shudder to think, oh my gosh, what is it that they're, that they don't feel comfortable telling me? Yikes, that's not okay. What can I do? And so I hope that I can use my position of privilege and my position to advocate for them, because there's no solving a problem unless you recognize that there is a problem, and you can't recognize that there's a problem without talking about it. So let's talk.
Danette?
Well, she kind of closed with, I guess, how I feel, which is I'm a part of the panel because, we can't fix an issue if nobody is willing to talk about it. And, in my personal experience, I have a lot of pushback, even if, just in general conversation, because people don't want to talk about it. And they think that a lot of people seem to believe that, there's nothing that we can do to make a big change. So I feel differently. So that's why I'm here.
Laura?
In my outreach in the community, what I hope to impact Beaver Dam, playground movement is looked at to be an advocate for many people that are marginalized, for many people that are affected by systemic racism. And no matter how many kiddos we play with and how many families we help financially or with food or whatever, until the system is changed, it won't have an impact for these kiddos. Personally, I grew up in the Pacific Northwest. There's a lot of color palette out there, lots of people groups, and I grew up thinking red, yellow, black, and white were all precious in His sight. I mean, that's what we sang every Sunday at church. And then I married a black man, and I figured out that that's not how the world operates. And I was this naive, well-meaning, everybody's got good in their heart kind of person, and that's not how it is. But I didn't understand that I was brought up in a systemically racist country. Perhaps the world's like that, but definitely and now that I've been on this, racial justice, get to know, talk, don't just talk the talk, walk the talk. Like I said, when my husband, my now husband, Ren, and I moved to Beaver Dam, the kiddos called Dad, Dad, and Mom, Mom. I mean, that's the roles we played in the house. And we'd have people saying, oh, that's so nice that you adopted these children. What? I got stretch marks from those people. And our kids were like, Ma, we're all the brown kids. We're all the brown people. And I told them, I know, honey, I gave them that pep talk because I can't understand what it means to be a person of color. I can understand small bits of having people prejudice and the mistreatment, the maltreatment, and the opportunities lost and that kind of thing. But what happened was our oldest graduated and moved on, and the second one said, I'm not going to stay here and be the only brown kid in high school. She's a drama queen. There were other brown people in high school. But I want to impact Beaver Dam so that our children, our people of color, aren't moving out. I want it to be a place where they can see someone that they identify with who's a mover and shaker in a position of power, in a position of government or education. I want them to see someone that they identify as or identify with. And I want them to stay here and make us a beautiful red, yellow, black, and white community.
This is the book, so you want to talk about race. Want to take a moment here to ask our panelists about the passages in the book that may have been of particular interest to you. And Laura, let's start with you. Maybe we'll start in the middle after the next question, but let's go back this way here and go down the run of the table. What was it for you in this book that stood out?
Well, mine's like really dog-eared, so it was really kind of hard to pick just one. But I liked at the beginning where Gioma, she talks about there are two kinds of racism. There's the individual and the systemic. And she says, you know, we're not going to get everybody to like everybody. That's just not going to happen, not in this world. So what she talks about in this book isn't the individual who may drive down the road with derogatory statements and else things, but what she's talking about is the systemic. And she says, the purpose of this book, I'm going to use the second definition of racism, a prejudice against someone based on race, when those prejudices are reinforced by systems of power. And that's what we're talking about in systemic racism. And I hope that this dialogue, that's not just so that we can all go, oh, well, I'm not racist, because we all are to some degree. It's not so we can say, oh, well, it's okay because I'm not, and when we can walk out here, but one that we will look at our systems, that we will look at them and see, maybe, I'm not saying everything's crap. People are here. That's a good thing. We're having this dialogue. That's a good thing. But what I hope from this is that we look at the systems and say, how can we do this better? How can we make this a better world? Not worldwide, but in the world that we can affect.
Jeanette?
So, a lot of their passages and, excuse me, chapters really resonated with me because of a lot of the things that she talks about, I've also gone through. My kids go through them. I don't want to say the most interesting, but one of the passages that really struck with me was when she was talking about the model minority. I never really thought about, I think about other races in a broad sense, but not a specific sense. It's always black and white in my world. So that's usually what I, gravitate towards, I guess. And so when she was saying, the model minority myth, and it's hurtful for them, for Asian Americans, even though it's a positive myth, it seems like, so I just thought that was a really interesting chapter.
Betsy?
Well, gosh. One thing that sticks out to me is I appreciate her vulnerability and being willing to tell me things that she has experienced and hurts that she has gone through. But then remind me that it's not a person of color's job to educate me on my ignorance of how my system and how my actions continue to hurt her.
Rob?
I'm not going to pick a specific passage or area. I'm going to pick a theme that arose in several chapters of the book when if you're not familiar with the book, several chapters had actions, things that can be done. And in a common theme across those, written differently, was, again, the constant theme was listen and reflect. And I think that's what we apply to help build better marriages, to get better at a skill, and we need to apply that to diversity, equity, inclusion, racism, right? We need to be able to listen, reflect. I listened to the author, and I'm going to listen to other people in the room tonight and reflect so that we can get better. So I appreciated that theme from the book.
John?
There was a lot of things in the book, but the one thing as a leader, being promoted myself through the department numerous times, she was given a manager position by one day, and she was at her desk, and everybody's congratulated her. And they said, hey, it was brought up in the manager's meeting today, congratulations. So everybody's stopping by her desk, congratulating her, and some are making it loud and clear, thanking her, and making sure that they everybody knows that she was promoted to this managing position, which is setting your culture and your future as to how you want your organization to run. And then all of a sudden, a day or two later, one of the managers comes by and goes, hey, there's some of these rumors. I have to apologize for these rumors. Unfortunately, none of these rumors are true. And I just can't imagine the devastation that must have went through this lady after everyone was giving her a lot of compliments, and they were talking about her in a staff meeting, and she doesn't get this promotion. And how crushed she must have been. And being promoted through the department and setting the culture, that meant a lot to me, and I had to put the book down just to think about that a little bit. And I that one stuck with me just a little bit as a leader, because here was your opportunity as a company or as a police department to set some culture and to promote someone. Obviously, you could tell by the book there were some people that weren't happy, but the majority of the people were happy and liked her, but others weren't. But obviously at that time they said another white female had filed a complaint, and that's why they're going to give it to her. So just because someone filed a complaint, even though she deserved this promotion as a manager, really hurt and really stuck with me for a little bit when I read that book.
Leslie.
So on page 137, it says, words have power. Words are more than their dictionary definition. And the history of a word matters as long as the effects of that history are still felt. And then she goes in to explain the N-word. And she tells a story prior to that about some white children calling her and her brother that at the bus stop. And growing up, I mean, the Upper Peninsula is pretty white. So my experiences are probably fairly similar to other panelists. And that feeling of isolation I felt as I actually listened to the book because of my commute, but it's the same. So, I really felt that. I remember being called those things, or the horrible name for ding dong ditch that people would use, and they would say it to me. As I got older and a little stronger, my joke was like, well, are we only going to my house? Like, that doesn't make any sense. Stop using that word, right? And that was a way to use humor to try to deflect, because it took me a long time to find my voice in the community. And then she goes on to talk about, it says, the people of color have inherited the pain of these words. And I don't think a lot of people take the time to understand the power of our words, and what that means. And you talked about microaggressions, and you can't say something and then just take it back. It just doesn't work that way. Once you said it, it's there and it exists and it's real and it hurts. And so, I do think there's some grace in apologizing, but you don't get to say how the person receives it. And that's where a lot of miscommunication comes in. And so I appreciated her talking about that.
Adiana.
Yeah, I kind of want to build off of what the last two panelists said. I myself have had the N-word thrown at me or thrown around me. One time someone used it when they were talking about their golf cart. Where's mine? And everyone stopped and they were like, what? And he was talking about his golf cart, right? I'm like, when did golf carts, right? But but the power of words, as an anthropologist, I love words and linguistics. And I want to take it back. The reason why words are so powerful is because they have history attached to them. And you cannot extrapolate a word from its history, right? And that's why I could throw the word cracker at a white person, but that would not have any surmountable effect as the N-word, right? Because that word was not used to dehumanize, to humiliate, to belittle, and to be smaller than an animal, to be used as chattel, right? And so I also really loved that part. And on 138, she also goes in and talks more deeply about that. But the other thing I really wanted to touch on is when in chapter I just got called racist. What do I do now? She explicitly says this chapter is for white people. Obviously, people of color will be reading this chapter. She says this is for white people, right? And I just want to read a short section. She goes, "You are racist because you are born and bred in a racist white supremacist society. white supremacy is, as I've earlier by design, the racism required to uphold white supremacy is woven into every area of our lives. There is no way you can inherit white privilege from birth, learn racism, white supremacy history in school books, consume racist and white supremacist movies and films, work in a racist and white supremacist workforce, and vote for racist and white supremacist governments and not be a racist, right? And one of my favorite white theorists, Steiker's, he has a really great, if you want to dive deeper into why by default, white people fall into this category of racism. He has this theory out, the pragmatic conception of racism. It's really good. I highly recommend you read it. His name's Kenneth Steiker, and he really dives into, and he's a white man, he dives into why, right? And it's not your intentions. Your intentions don't matter. It's the consequences of actions that we unknowingly or do knowingly do. And I just really liked how she unpacked that, and it's really difficult for a lot of people to hear that. And there's visceral reactions in our bodies when we hear these words. You might even feel your hand sweating a little bit, or you're getting a little smaller, as we like to do when we are in fear, right? Growing up in the society as a person of color, I myself internalized racism. And there's a lot of amazing literature out there about internalized racism, but that is something I had to unpack and unlearn and reflect. And I think reflection and learning is super important. But yeah, I won't take up any more time. But I love this book.
Alicia.
All right. And thanks for sharing that, Ariana, because you're always teaching me new things. So the part that I liked a lot of it, but the part that really resonated with me is something that I've experienced, and that's I've been tone policed a lot in my life. And I love on page 210, she says, nobody has authority over your fight for racial justice. Those who tone police you are trying to manipulate you into thinking that their validation is required to legitimize your desire for racial justice. This is abusive behavior. And I find that so powerful for me, because there have been many times when I have excused and thought, oh, they just don't know, or they're really old, or they're really young, or whatever, right? And done with that. I have a right to stand up and have my voice and not be told how I'm supposed to act in order for them to feel comfortable. So I love that throughout her book.
So the next question that I want to ask is, what personal experiences or observations regarding racism can you share? And I'm wondering, we can keep going back and forth this way if you'd like, but would somebody prefer to start this hand? And I can go up and down the aisle if you want. Alicia, we can start with you again.
Does anyone have something that they really want to share? Or?
I wanna start by so I read this book. It's called My Grandmother's Hands, and it's on healing myself and healing Black bodies and white bodies from racism, right? And I just want to check in not only with you guys, but with myself. When I'm posed this question, my body starts to shake, right? And it's trauma. It's how bodies react, right? And trauma is stored at the cellular level. But I will say that I've experienced racism throughout my life, right? But it's shocking to a lot of adults when I explain that the most racism was when I was younger. It's inside of the schools, elementary, middle school, high school, where you are surrounded by other underdeveloped prefrontal cortex individuals, right, that are hearing all these things and hearing it and internalizing it and just, right? And it comes in waves. Like when Obama won the election, I come into class and every single student in class turned to me and said, "Oh, you brown people are destroying our country. How stupid are you brown people?" Right? And I'm like, oh, that hurts. But that doesn't, you know? And I'll make all these weird sounds and movements because it's kind of like when you talk about these experiences, you go back into it, right? I already shared the after prom, we were all in the barn, it's Beaver Dam, at the after party, right? And he said to everybody in the room, "Where's my..." And everyone stopped and looked at me. And I had to excuse his behavior by saying, right? This is when I was young, right? I didn't have my knowledge, my strength yet, and I could have. There's a lot of young people nowadays that definitely do. And, you know, but it's all the time. In college, we had a white professor teaching African American linguistics at Marquette. We couldn't have found someone of color to teach African, you know. So, but he said the N-word in class when he was talking about how the hard R is dropped in a lot of different words. But he used that word as an example. It is on the board. We are all aware of what the N-word means. Why can't you just say the N-word? I had another professor in college, and he said spiggers and spics and all these words. And I'm like, I am Afro-Latina. So these words affect me, and I couldn't go back to his class. I had to find and fight with Marquette to find a way to get this class credit without having to see this person who has caused harm. Or it's even in the little microaggressions. "Oh, how nice to meet you. What's your name?" "Oh, my name's Ariana." You roll the R because my mom's Puerto Rican. I'm Puerto Rican, right? And she goes, "Oh, I'm so glad you told me what you were because otherwise I would just be sitting here thinking about it the whole time." You know? And there's this awesome passage where she talks about microaggressions, and she has around 15 of them, or no, 20, 30 of them. And I was like, oh, this one. "Are you an affirmative action hire? Wow, you speak English really well. Why do black people give their kids such funny names? That's so ghetto. Is that your real hair? Can I touch it? No, you can't touch my hair. I don't know where your dirty fingers have been." Right? And it's like, wow, your name is so difficult for me. Do you have a nickname? No, my name is Ariana. And if I can take the time to say your name correctly, you can take the time to say my name correctly, right? You don't sound black. You're so exotic. That fiery Latin blood, right? And I'll leave it at that, but yeah, that's all I'm gonna say.
Would anybody else like to speak to that question?
Honestly, I think our age is very different, but I think we have a lot of very similar stories. My mother is Norwegian, Swedish, and my father was Black, Native American, and white. My great-grandfather was a product of slave rape. My grandmother watched a slave be tarred and feathered. That's about as far as my history goes, because they didn't exactly write the names down of enslaved people before they threw them on ships. So I guess for me, the fight now is more for my boys. And so there have been situations in the community. School tends to be, and they're at a really good school in Sheboygan. And so one example was they go to a charter school, which we picked on purpose because of the rigor, and they learn about religion and they write a paper on slavery in second grade. They're not doing that in the public schools, not in Sheboygan. And so they're talking about Christianity, Judaism, and then more Muslims. And one little girl turned around to my now 12-year-old and said, "Oh, well, you must be a Muslim because all Muslims are brown." And he's my emotional one. He didn't cry, he just was confused. And so he came home and, kids never like preface, right? They just blurt stuff out and you're like, and he's like, "Are we Muslim?" I'm like, "What?" why do you, like, no, not that there's anything wrong with that, but why do you think that? And so then he told me that. And so then I went to the school because Mama Bear came out, and I just said, hey, I'm just curious, what are the pictures you're showing the kids of Muslims? Because all Muslims aren't brown. And they're like, oh my gosh, it's a curriculum that comes in a box, and it's a good curriculum, but we never thought about that. And I said, well, I think I need you to think about that because it affected my son, and this is what happened. Another time, maybe it's because he's the emotional one, it happens to him the most. I have to worry about my younger one, or maybe the other kids have to worry about my younger one. But there was a plane flying over, and this was in the height of President Trump's election, and a little boy looked at him and said, "That is the plane with all the black people. We're sending them back where they belong."
Can I interject something? Do you see how our postures have changed? It's not brown people's job to explain to us how we're racist. And this question, it's got to hurt to relive these incidents. I can't tell you how many times I picked up my kids from after-school care or school, only to have someone apologize to me because some other kid called my kid the N-word. And I wanted to sit in the parking lot and have a come to Jesus meeting with some parents, but I knew I needed to get my kids home. I can tell you, one of my kids threatened to poke somebody in the snot box when her little sister got called the N-word, and I got called to school because my kids got called the N-word, and it fed a violence and it fed negativity in them. And I sat across from a school counselor who said, well, you know how they are. Steer hooey. It happens. I'm sorry that you have to relive telling what it's like. That's gotta hurt. It's not your job to tell us. It happens, folks, period.
I think that's a really important point, Laura, is that it happens. And it is very difficult. And that's why I said at the beginning, I'm here for my daughter, with my daughter, because it's so hard to keep talking about it. And if anyone questions, right, then do your research. But I want to expand on what you just said about being in the counselor's office. I was in a counselor's office because what Ariana shared about when Obama was elected the first time, and she was only 14 and she was a freshman in high school, and the other side of that was that she was so afraid, right? In school, you don't know how to respond to some of these things. And the counselor called me and said, you have to come because Ariana is in a bathroom. She won't come out. And she was at a Christian school at the time, and in Waupun, and I drove to Waupun, and I went in, and I'm talking to the counselor, and she told me the same thing. It's what I'm like, I am not sending my daughter to a Christian school to learn hate. And I do still, that hurts. And that's when you can't protect your own children. Like I said, I knew my father's stories. I was with my grandmother when she was looked down on because she has, her Spanish accent. And, but when it was my child, and that's what I can't justify to any of my friends in this community, is that don't talk to me about, that first racism doesn't exist, or they don't have to worry that when their daughter gets stopped, or all of these things that we have to worry about, right? It is, I wish that everyone could just love the way that we love our children and love each other, because any pain is all of our pain.
There's been a lot of references to education. Betsy, Rob, would you like to make any statements as it regards to this topic before we move on to the next one?
I do know that when Trump was elected, politics aside, question mark, everything ends up being political in one way or another. When Trump was elected, there were white students telling Mexican students, woo-hoo, you're going to be deported now, build the wall, chants like that in between classes. I mean, when not in front of teachers because they know better than that, but it still happened. And you think they want to come to school now? I mean, it's fascinating, and by fascinating, I really mean enraging, that people have to continue to tell these stories, which are personal and traumatic, and frankly, nobody's business. If someone asked me some of these questions, I would say, that's none of your business. But they have to tell these stories or give these explanations to prove that they're human beings. That's appalling. But that doesn't have anything to do with education, which was the question.
Well, how can our community, or, the community, we as individuals, what kind of specific actions can be taken against racism, whether it appears in workplaces, in the community in general, or in schools?
Craig, if I could go back to just look at education for the previous question and maybe lead into this question a little bit. Obviously, experiences of racism, I've been an observer for, right? I've observed stories, and that's it's unfortunate, but I feel that witnessing certain actions by people, racist actions, over different periods of my life, that's shaped me. I'm not blind, right? That these things occur, and I hope it's led me to be some sort of advocate. But going to education in the classroom, some of those more micro ideas, maybe not necessarily microaggressions, but working with students as a high school social studies teacher, and the constant conversations about where am I here, as we're teaching history or we're talking about social issues. Is that accurate, right? And having very real conversations with kids, and thankfully, young people had courage to raise those questions with me so that I could become better. But when we talk about education, and you talk about what we can do, again, my role is to ensure that we have a system that ensures high levels of learning for all. So it's dismantling policies, reorganizing our system. I think the educators in Beaver Dam have been doing a fantastic job over the last several years to become significantly better in ensuring our system provides high levels of learning. Again, I have a privilege to work with really great people. But we've also got to make sure that students can see themselves and feel welcome in school, and that we are an environment that welcomes diversity by showing diversity, right? And I think we're working on that. But and you've been mentioning that if people don't feel welcome in our environment, I don't know that we're going to get high levels of learning for all. So I think for me, it's taking a look at our environment, listening, and ensuring that if I weren't in my shoes, would I feel welcome here? Would I feel appreciated here? So I think that's something that we can be doing.
And in addition to the regular curriculum for the core subject areas, we have SEL, it's called, social emotional learning. And part of that is learning how to recognize that, oh, I'm a bystander to bullying. If I just stand here and do nothing, I'm contributing to the problem. What strategies could I use to address this problem? So in little ways here and there, students are being taught to look for mistreatments and stand up against them.
Chief Kreitzer?
Well, I have an incident that involves a large apartment complex in Beaver Dam where there was 24 units, there was 5 buildings, and we were getting a lot of calls for service, and they started all these stories and things about race and how these people shouldn't be there. And there was mostly male blacks living in these apartment complexes were coming here. And we had all these things in law enforcement where why don't we just go down there and start arresting people to, what is the answer? Why don't we put some debris feeds on the end of our road? So I did a whole totally different approach to it. I went and talked to a female of color, and Sheree Davis Williams, and she helped me out by going to every single apartment and talking to every single resident, and finding out what the true issues or the true problems were. And we found out that there was such a small number that were really causing the problem. And we found out a lot of the issues were coming with the owners and the managers and how they handled things. And it came up with this one conclusion: every apartment that had a person of color, bugs weren't taken care of. You know how we have those screens in our sliding doors that don't always work in the apartment? Them weren't taken care of. But it was the people that are white, they always got them taken care of right away. And they always said, oh yeah, the bugs are taken care of, the screens are fixed. And I'm like, by the end of this conversation with all these people, and she was doing a wonderful job. So then I sat down and called out the manager, then we called out the owner, and then we started addressing some of the problems. And I remember one of the best moments I had is we went to this one female's apartment. She had these two little kids, and both of them come out, and one of them grabbed one of my legs, put an arm around the other one, put my arm around the other leg, and they were just the sweetest little kids. And she just said, hey, I'm up here to change my life. I've come here to new life. I want to stay in my apartment. I don't want to cause problem. I don't want to be out in the hallways. So we had addressed that in a different way that we knew was a race issue, and it was because of their race. And you could see the pattern after I documented each apartment and what each one said. You could see that, and it was very well evident. And when we called them out on that, it was quite the conversation. The first thing he said, well, I'm not racist. I said, yes, you are racist. So I think one of the things we need to do is when we see that as leaders, we need to call people out on that and confront them about that. And we had a nice conversation about that. And I had documentation to prove every single one of those. And I also with the owner, I had brought that up to the owner and said, here they are, here are the quotes, here are the people, here's their comments, here's what's not being done. And after that, we got different cooperation with bugs and all screens and everything else that we finally got fixed for people of color. So it was great to be part of that, but that's in Beaver Dam.
Ariana?
Yeah. What exactly was the question?
Sure. The question is about taking specific actions in our community against
Yeah.
racism.
Yeah.
You know, it reads as what are some actions that we might encourage a community or us as individuals to take whenever it may appear in our schools,
Thank
in our
you.
workplaces.
Yeah, I just want a quick little, reminder. But yeah, exactly that. Going in, reflecting, and finding the patterns, not in only schools, but in businesses, in legislation, in judicial systems. We can see the patterns. They are there, right? And as managers, as business owners, as teachers, we need to be critical of the institutions we ourselves are involved in. Every single person here can have an effect to deconstruct institutionalized racism because we are all a part of an institution. So whether we are asking for, hey, can we see, or if I can't see it, can you guys do an investigation on our pay? Who is paid the most? Are there large disparities in the racial pay in our company, right? Who in our community is not getting access to resources? What areas of our community doesn't have that same access? Because it is the resources, that is the issue that racism truly inflicts upon minorities. It is the lack of access, right? And the other thing I wanted to say was that we can, as educators, we can expose our children to more. I feel like we have diversity training for teachers, we should have diversity training for students, right? Especially in areas where there's not diverse people. Right? The biggest way to combat racism, one of the biggest ways, and I'll say the biggest way, there's so many different things and every single little thing matters, right? But one way is to be engaging with other people that are outside of yourself, right? So yeah, I'll leave it at that.
So, we're still under this general topic of actions we can take in the community, but Ariana has brought up a number of good ideas under that topic, the lack of access, the patterns, this idea of patterns. Does anybody on the panel want to follow up on that idea or another?
I'll talk about employment. I actually had considered making like a flyer to, pass out, and as an HR person, the author addressed, it's okay, the impact on human lives, on families, because of racism. So that affects your salary, your promotability, really how you can engage in your community is impacted if your career is limited, right? I think what Ariana said about everything that she said is to speak up, speak out. And we cannot afford to not speak up. And so all of us have an opportunity. If you hear something that's racist, speak up. We can't let emboldened racists continue their dialogue freely. They should be ashamed, and we should call them out. And I think whether you're on a board of an organization, a leader in the community, or a grandmother, it doesn't matter. You always have that opportunity to speak out, speak up.
Can I piggyback one little thing? Sure. The other thing, when I've had discussions with groups, is that, and especially with my friends in college, we would love to get in debates. My friends used to call me preacher because I love talking. But they, like all my white friends, I could not name one white friend that didn't say, I have a racist family member, right? I could not name one white person that doesn't know someone who is racist overtly, right? And, there's microaggressions and everything. But talking to those family members, no, grandma is not too old to have a conversation, right? And if we talked to our family members and we started at that family unit, right? Maybe you're too scared to talk to your bosses and jobs, but if you could start with your own family, that will have ripple effects. And Ijoma, in her book, lays out some things that I haven't touched on, but supporting an increase in the minimum wage, that would help. Boycotting businesses that exploit workers of colors, supporting music, film, television, art, and books created by people of color, support POC-owned businesses, find those businesses and see, ooh, maybe I'll get my soap from there instead of Walmart, Boycott banks that prey on people of color. Give money to organizations working to fight racial oppression, right? If you feel too scared, give your coin away to someone who isn't, There's so much you can do, and I will leave it at that for real.
You talk about being willing to have the conversations on whatever scale, and I would absolutely agree. But I think people in the room, myself, people in positions of power, whether it be on that board, whether it be in whatever industry you're in, we have to also be willing to listen. But because we're in the room tonight, I think we realize that we have growing to do, but that doesn't mean that anybody in the room is perfect, and I'm certainly not. I'm sure that I could have conversations with people in the room about things that I'm doing, and or I've said tonight, and people need to have a conversation with me about it to help learn and grow. So not only should we be willing to have the conversations, but we should be willing to listen as well, so that we can become better. That's I think the number one way that I've grown is listening to the students that I've served as an educator.
And what is it that's motivating you to address racism in your lives? You come from kind of an observational standpoint as it relates to racism. Where do you find the strength, maybe in some cases, to stand up to in a situation that could be, you know, a pretty anxiety-inducing situation for some. It could be a scary situation for some.
I think we won't address it until we acknowledge it. And for some of us, you don't have to be a racist person to live in a racist system, is a very poor quote of what Gioma said in her book. And when you educate yourself, education and knowledge brings power. So if making an impact on racism is something that's near and dear to your heart, read the books, have the conversations, do the uncomfortable thing. I was looking, my belief is that there needs to be some serious systemic, we need to, as Rob said, dismantle policies. We need to look at our systems. We need to see what's making them fail for marginalized people groups, for people of color, and embrace the change. I know that's that's thrown around, but it's scary. Change is scary, especially on a large level. So when I was reading through the questions and preparing for tonight, I looked up quotes on system change. And the three that really stuck with me is individual accountability is not a substitute for systemic change. Jamie Arpan-Ricci. Well, we talked about that. Good that we're not racist, but okay. If the system is the problem, the truth is that there will not be satisfactory answers in the here and now for lots of people. This is not a quick thing, folks. That's one of the painful ways you know that the problem is systemic, which means that either you build forward no matter what, or you lose, period. So each one of us that stands against racism, we have to make those steps or we will lose. And that's by Gar Alperovitz. Yeah. It's an author. And it says, until you consciously decide to prioritize the elimination of stagnant, exclusive culture that and this was an author was talking about a company, will be in a position to make the systemic changes needed to both address and eventually abolish disparities. We need to decide that we're tired of this stagnant, exclusive culture. It's not okay. We might be comfortable, but until everybody in our community has the same rights, the same opportunities, the same positions of power, the same positions of leadership, then none of us should be comfortable with ours.
Danette, what motivates you?
My kids are here, so they are what motivate me to, join these groups and the board. And not only that, just it's hard to combat something especially when I'm raised in Mayville. So there's a lot of the things that you don't know and nobody is telling you about them. And then you're facing I was always, things were just said or done, and it's just, nobody would tell me that, well, there's a history behind that and here's why. And so I want my kids to know, where we came from, where we all came from, so that everybody can grow. But it's not just those two. I mean, I want everybody to do that. Like, everybody should know why Colin Kaepernick has taken a knee and why you should be, glad that we're trying to do this in a peaceful manner. But people need to know that this is going on, and if you're not paying attention or watching Fox News, then you're gonna miss it. And so, they motivate me to, but I gotta tell you guys, sometimes it gets a little tiring. And, when we were talking about the educators before, Brooklyn, my daughter is a senior this year, and I guess I'm just waiting, because there's 2 teachers that, one I only heard about through other students. The first one, though, Brooklyn came home and said that in the middle of this class, this lady used the N-word. And Brooklyn is the only person of color in the room, so of course, everybody is like, looking at her. And there were other people that surprised her in being an ally. And then there were ones that, she lost the friendship because they didn't understand why that was unacceptable. And so I guess I feel shame because I didn't immediately go to the school on that one. But I didn't do that in the moment because I was just exhausted. It was like every time I turned around, I was combating, and usually with people a lot closer than a teacher in my life, and I was just tired. And so I just want to say that. Sometimes it gets really old. I don't mind talking about it. I don't mind, I'm glad to be a part of the panel, but sometimes it just gets a little bit much. And so, that's why I join these things and try to talk about it.
Jeanette, to that point, that's similar to what Leslie had said earlier. Like, you can't think that I'm speaking for all Puerto Rican women in the world, right? Sometimes we are just tired.
Yeah.
I don't feel like taking the battle, right? That it's hard not to. I'll tell you that. But that's one of the reasons, like, I pulled off of, like, social media, because I'm like, I am not in the mood to deal with this all the time and to explain it and all of that. But like being on a panel is different because we choose it. We know what we're walking our. Most of the time, what people of color, we're just trying to live our life, right? She was just trying to be a freshman in high school. We're just walking into a room. We're just going shopping. We're just going for a jog, whatever that, like, we're not choosing to go into a battle and justify why we are worthy, right? And so it is exhausting.
Or valid, because even she hit on that in there too,
Yep.
which is like, it's okay. If you're not sure if it's about racism and the other person is a person of color and they're telling you it's about racism, it is. And I thought that was so profound because I've had so many people all in my life that are like, wow, you don't really know. And I'm like, wow, feels like that, sounds like that, but okay, maybe I don't really know. And then, and that keeps happening. And I'm like, just reading that line was like, oh, okay, so I am good enough. You know what I mean? It is okay that that's how I feel and that I can say that, and that's okay. Because otherwise you're always like, well, I don't want to upset somebody, and maybe I am, and no, it's not about me. It is about that person and their ignorance, and I'm more than willing to educate them.
Yeah, I want to add on to that just because I've had those same conversations. Oh, that was racist. Oh, I didn't mean that, and it's like, well, your intention does not matter. Right? Intentionality has no reality in the actuality of how your words manifested and hurt me, or how your actions manifested and got this policy through that increases incarceration rates for Black people and unjustly, or the amount of sentencing, like the increase in sentencing. And the other thing I really wanted to say before I actually address this question was that we have this issue in America where we have, and it's shown in studies, we have two different realities and preconceptions of what racism is in white America versus Black America. It's one example is in the George Zimmerman, right? The non-guilty verdict. 57% of white Americans felt that that was a valid verdict, where only 7% of Black Americans did. George Zimmerman was the man who shot that boy, Trayvon, for having Skittles, right?
And his hood out.
And
his hood.
Right? Mm-hmm. The hood.
And so we have these two different conceptions of what racism is. And in white America, a common conception is that you have to know you are racist to be a racist. That's not true. Just choked on my gum. You don't have to know you are racist to be a racist. You don't, and people like to be like, well, I'm not that racist, right? I was like, that doesn't matter in the long run. Go ahead.
Yeah. I'm going to say something super unpopular right now, but it kind of feeds into what everybody's saying. One is racial battle fatigue is a very real thing. I can tell you right now, my body is physically exhausted from this conversation. I share a lot at work, and I love where I work and what I do, but I share a lot with the students and then the faculty and staff, like just remember, this is exhausting for me. I don't get to go home and unzip my skin and be somebody else. This work is personal and it's real. And what I think is exhausting for people of color is who the media, social media especially, chooses to vilify for bad behavior. And so here it comes, and don't throw anything at me. Colin Kaepernick got brought up, and that's what made me think of it, right? He took a knee, a peaceful form of protest on a public platform, which is what I want people to do. If they have a platform, use it. People do it at the Grammys and the Golden Globes and all those things I never watch. But Brett Favre has stolen millions of dollars from poor people, and no one's talking about it. Shannon Sharp is talking about it. If you watch that, it's actually a really good clip. But no one is outraged on social media. Like, I just got the chills. I literally text my husband, who's in a mission trip in Guatemala as we speak, and said, I cannot believe this. And I'm not even a Packer fan. Again, don't throw anything. But he was one of the few I liked until I've learned things. And it just, these are the kind of things that are hard for people of color, because someone in the limelight does something wrong, and everyone is screaming about what a horrible person they are. And here is someone who did horrible things, and they have documented proof. Doesn't think George Floyd was a murder. Like, there's all these things he's been saying lately, and no one's talking about it. And that's really difficult. It's really difficult. And that's where some of that racial battle fatigue comes in too. It's like, when are we not the victims of these things? Why is it always someone that looks like us that's vilified? It's really, like, I really feel like I ran a marathon tonight. I haven't run anything in a while, so I'm saying a lot. But that's the kind of stuff that it may not seem like a big deal, but it is a really big deal. It is a really big deal, especially for me, a mom of boys, and my oldest is very analytical, and he looks at every angle of things, which I really appreciate. But for my younger two, I gotta really be careful who I want them to be role models. I want it to be their dad first, right? But famous people let us down all the time, but they see a lot more things about people that look like them that are villainified than people that don't.
And just to
Thank you for not throwing in.
And just to touch on that, if you look at the research, like, my body has been shaking. I'm not nervous, right? It's just the trauma. And this is how my body and a lot of bodies process trauma, especially when you have to talk about it. And when I had seen that question, what personal experiences or observations can you share? I was like, okay, so I need to relax all day long so that I have the energy to be able to share very traumatic experiences. And I didn't share all my experiences. I've had way more traumatic experiences, but I can't share them without going into my body, right? And the other thing is, if you ask someone of color, hey, can you talk to me about this? Like, I'm trying to learn, and they turn you down and say no, that is our right to say no. If we don't want to address it, then we don't have to, because it is taxing, and it is something I have learned through college, because I would always be the black person in the room, and all eyes would, what do you want to share about this, thing? And it's like, I always felt like I had to, but I'm getting to the point where I don't have to share. But my humanity should still be shown, right? That's it.
My humanity should still be shown. I think that's that's probably a good jumping off point here for tonight. I want to thank all of you so much for participating in this panel. I know it wasn't easy for everybody, but I think we all collectively have been able to take something from it. The hope of this program this evening is to get together here after this panel discussion, which is now concluding, and get in groups and talk about some of these matters that have come up. We've got a breakout session planned. Annette has divided specific numbers. She did a head count, and I think we're looking for about 10 people per group, if I'm not mistaken. What we're going to do is the appointed person in each one of your groups, you'll have to appoint somebody within your group, is going to record some of the highlights of the discussion that you have in your breakout session. And then we're going to ask that representative from your group to come up and just kind of share in conclusion of this evening what it is that you were able to take away from that small group breakout session. So again, I do want to thank just everybody who was on this panel here now, and ask you if you would look at the ground here. We've got some orange X marks on the ground, and Annette has something to say. Thank you so much for the time that you spent in the small group breakouts. Just observe. I was in my own small group breakout and just observing the small group activity that was going on, the conversations that were happening. It was clearly very engaging for everybody that, from the outsider's perspective of looking into your groups. So thank you for taking the time to participate in those. Thank you to our panelists for, oh my gosh, some of you have to. Some of them have to get back to Mayville and Sheboygan tonight, so we want to, and some of you have to get to Jane. Thank you, too, for coming out here. I know that's something you say at the end, but you applauded for all these people because you're participating in this. I mean, this is what it's about. So thank you. So I'm very excited to hear what the takeaways were from the breakout group, and because Alicia loves going first so much, and we've known each other for so long, I could tell in her eyes that she was like, Craig, I'm going to go first. So Alicia, if you could give us your insights of what you took away from that small group experience.
Yeah. I feel that it was a good conversation. Everyone was aligned, and something that was mentioned was that, is this the audience that we need to get to? So what do we do next, right? That people coming tonight are probably more anti-racist than. So that, I kind of left with that feeling of like, yeah, but I want my group to know, our group, because we were together, to know like that I have hope, and we can all make a difference, and to not think that it's just like this is nice for our community and then it ends here. I think we can keep working together. And by the way, my husband, a few years ago, started a racial justice for Beaver Dam group. So if you'd like to learn more, please let us know. So.
I think even anti-racist people don't necessarily automatically have the tools to know how to deal with an overtly racist situation.
And that's a great point, because I am constantly learning, right? I'm learning about not to misgender folks, right? There's always something. Just because I'm Puerto Rican doesn't mean that I know what Black people go through. And so I am constantly learning and growing and seeking, and that's not anything to be ashamed of. And so we should celebrate that in our community.
Ariana.
I loved our dialogue. It could have gone on for hours, I feel. And that, on that note, that this is not the end of our dialogues, right? And even if you claim to be, if you are an anti-racist, even if I've worked on unpacking my own internalized racism, it is a consistent and constant thing that you have to do every time you breathe, basically. Like, it is not going to go away, the work that you have to do. And that I am so thankful that you guys are willing to begin that work, or you're in that journey. But this journey does not end, and it won't end until there's not a single person who feels this pain. And I don't know if that'll happen in my lifetime, but I do know that I want to strive for that. And so thank you guys for being here. It's awesome.
Thank you for your observations, Ariana and Baruden family. We appreciate that. Leslie.
All right, so I'm a list person, so I have to go in order. So as far as barriers, we had good conversation about like opportunity and exposure. Obviously, when you're living in a community that doesn't have a lot, sometimes that can be difficult. There's little chatter of the fear of just kind of the unknown, or if it's a language barrier, and how do you break that down when you both don't speak the same language. Addressing racism was a very interesting part of the conversation because I feel like the group agreed, like holding people accountable, but then sometimes you have to think about, is it your boss, right, who says the comment? Most of us probably need to work, right, to pay the bills. And so that puts you in a difficult situation, or is it the patriarch or matriarch of your family and you're borderlining on respect? Or maybe one person shared kind of a traumatic experience where at a young age corrected an aunt who used the N-word and said, never again. The way the aunt reacted, did that person ever say anything again? Like, that's trauma too. So I want to acknowledge that. The new information, I think, was the most fun part, so thank you, group. Talking about racial battle fatigue, it's something that one person said, like, I'd never thought of that. I never thought of how that affects people on a daily basis. The same with really connecting with those of us who said we're concerned about our kids. And we have these genuine concerns sometimes on a daily, hourly basis, depending on the situation. And that helped some of the audience in that group connect with us. Like, well, I have kids. I have family that I care about. And so now just thinking of it in a different way. And then this is really interesting. We had a retired teacher in the group, and maybe more than one, but said, that fatigue can affect students' learning, because we talked a lot about education and the disparities in education. So it's no different than a kid who's hungry, honestly. They're going to act out certain ways or not act out at all, or maybe not even come to school. And then trauma and fear. The group was like, wow, we didn't really think about it being traumatic. And Ariana did the best explanation of our bodies, because she's saying it, and I'm like, yep, that's what I'm feeling right now. And we're both sweating like pigs up here. I'm like, I need to shower. And just that constant fear, that's really exhausting. I know I said it, and I guess I feel it a lot, but it's really, really exhausting when you're scared. A lot of times in certain spaces, and it's not every day, every hour, but there's a lot of places where it exists. And so thank you to our small group. It was a really good conversation.
Thank you, Leslie. We appreciate that. And thank you for coming here from Sheboygan.
I worked in the Beaver Dam office today.
Oh.
But she has to drive back.
But I do have to get
right. Chief.
Yeah, our group was very engaging. We didn't have enough time, but while we were so engaging, I had a volunteer to agree to take notes. So please share what we all talked about.
As he pointed out, he is the chief.
Yes, you're delegating responsibility. Very good.
Delegated, yes. I couldn't listen. Thank you to our group for their spirited discussion. What are the barriers that sometimes make it difficult to relate to people of a race or culture other than your own? We talked about the status quo, and that we've just sometimes as white people fall into certain patterns with friends and activities where we don't have very much exposure to other cultures or races. Lack of access. My husband and I both grew up in this area. There were absolutely no people of color when we were growing up. And I remember when our kids are little, thinking intentionally about how can I have them interact with other people, and we went to different camps and different activities to be able to do that. That we spend maybe too much time talking and not enough time listening. And thank you, panelists. It's really been quite profound for me. Fear of offending another race, that you read this book and you realize, oh, I have said that, and I certainly didn't mean it that way, but it's not about intention. It's about consequences and results. How can we address racism? Immediately challenge overtly racist comments. I loved some of the suggestions from our group, especially Chief Kreitzer. You don't need to say this. if you hear a racist comment, saying that to the person, or what makes you say that? Or where are you coming from when you say something like that? Or, hey, I don't appreciate that. So those are maybe some considerations we could make when addressing overt racism. What new information did you learn? Well, we could have gone on and on, I'm sure. But basic bottom line is importance of respecting all people. And I know in preparing for this, someone with a lot of knowledge about cultural competency said, well, are you doing this to make yourself feel good or really to promote the idea of cultural competency? And I said, I just want to get out of the way so everybody can reach their full potential. And then the necessity of thinking through scenarios, thank you, Margaret, about so that when somebody says something overt and racist, we don't have to go on a walk around the block or for a bike ride before we can come up with an answer. So maybe to play a few of those scenarios in our mind so we have something ready and prepared to say. So thank you.
That was great. Thank you very much. That brings us to Rob.
Kind of boiling down our group, we spent a little bit of time just kind of processing where we are and reflecting, and I think there was some mutual disgust in the group for where we are, that we have to be having the conversation, and so there was processing through that a little bit. But then that came to some conversations, just pondering what we can do as individuals, what we can do as a community for next steps, and that's been brought up before. And I know we're closing, we're going down the line, so I just want to thank everybody that was able to share their stories tonight on my behalf, helping me learn. And I don't know if I contributed or not, but I certainly hope that this conversation doesn't end tonight. And something I say that I steal from others in education. So this is stealing from somebody, but we talk about educational reform and educational change, educational progress, and it's a daunting thing. It's years, right? There's a lot of process. And so there's a presenter called Mike Matos, and he ends his presentations with, how do you eat an elephant? Poor elephant. No elephant's harmed. But he says, how do you eat an elephant? And the answer is one bite at a time, right? And I think that's our approach, because we can look at this as an extremely daunting issue, and it is. But if we just look at an issue and admire, there is not action. So we can have those conversations, right? Maybe that is something that's an individual thing. We can step into other people's shoes when we're looking at our environment, our education system, whatever that might be. So I just want to offer that bit of hope. At least that's what I operate on, is that bit of hope is, I can't eat the elephant, but I can contribute. And I think we all can.
Thanks, Rob. Betsy.
We shared a group, and they were lovely. Some things that weren't already mentioned were, right, we're white people, but we're different white people, right? We have different ethnic backgrounds, maybe different religions, and we seem to get along just fine. But then all of a sudden, we meet a person of color, and we forget how to act. And that's really silly, isn't it? And easily remedied, right? To just speak to someone like another human being that maybe doesn't go to the same church or maybe isn't from the same country. And then another thing we talked about was children, right? They speak impulsively and they say these dumb, hurtful things, and they say, I didn't mean it that way. And then, like, oh, okay, well, you didn't mean it that way. Like, we have to stop standing for that. We have to have adults teaching children that that's not okay. You didn't mean it that way. Well, then don't say it, right? That's not something we're going to do here. That's not something we're going to do in this school. That's not something we're going to do in this family. And just not to detract from the stories and the trauma that have been shared, but just to chime in on behalf of people who weren't born here. So for anyone who was born here and has a U.S. passport and a social security number, our lives are so much easier than someone who is an immigrant, right? And if you're not a Native American, you are descended from an immigrant. And there are so many immigrant families in this community that are living in fear. Some people in their family have passports and some people don't. Some people have work permits and some people don't. And they never know when they come home if their mom will still be there, if their dad will still be there. They know they have a court date. They don't know how it'll turn out. And with an election coming up, I would encourage you to think about that as you're voting, and not just vote for yourself, but vote for the people that cannot vote.
Thank you so much, Danette and Betsy. Did you want to add anything? No. So, thank you. Laura? We began with Laura and we get to end with Laura, so no pressure.
I sat with a group who was very compassionate. The things that were discussed tonight, the stories they've heard, they were like, now what? And so I think the general summary and the general feel that I got, at least from my group, is they want to have these conversations, they want to learn, they want to have dialogue. They feel that we feel that it would be beneficial to have more conversations, more dialogues, ways that we can get together and role play. My group was a quiet group, so I stuck out. And when we were talking about addressing racism in our workplace and our families and that kind of thing, they were worried initially about hurting feelings. But I think they came to the understand that we have to get out of our comfort zone. And when we are addressing racism, if you look in the mirror and you kind of reflect yourself there, and it's like blinding, that's not about you. And so addressing racism can't be about you and your comfort too. And so I was really encouraged with my group that they were like, they wanted to say, do what next? As far as new information we learned, intersectionality was something that was new for me as well, and someone else brought that up in the group. They would like to discuss that more so they have a better understanding of it. And one of the shocking things that we learned was the origins of law enforcement, which explains a lot of the systemic, when we talk about police brutality and whatnot. So there were some neat things that in the book that helped us understand when you talk about not just someone being a donkey's patoot, but actually the long systemic part of it.
Netflix has a special. It's called The 13th.
I'm sorry?
Netflix has a special. A movie. It's The 13th. I think it's just. I don't think amendment is in. It could be. I think it's just the 13th. Yeah. Yeah. And that breaks it down.
Yeah, it does.
History Channel, Netflix.
Well, I think we broke it down a little bit today. I think we were able to kind of get into this, and even if we tend to be the anti-racist group, like I said earlier, that doesn't necessarily mean that we know how to be empowered to stand up to racism when we confront it. And by not standing up to it, when somebody who considers themselves anti-racist, if you don't stand up to it, you perpetuate it. I hope people here were able to take things away that they can bring with them along those lines. That's one of the things that I took away from this. I read that we're all within 50 cousins of each other recently. And that's true, I mean, if that is, it's even less than that, yeah. I think that's something that hopefully that we could all keep in mind and start to learn as a culture. And I think it's because of opportunities like this and taking advantage of them, coming down and clearing your night. And again, I want to thank all of you for coming down. I want to thank our panelists again, Alicia Baruden, Laura Gurrell. Did I get it right? All right. John Kreitzer, Leslie Laster, Danette McMuller, Rob Meyer, Betsy Ramsdale, and Ariana Baruden. Thank you guys all so much for your time with us this evening. And I know for many of you it was not easy. That is very much appreciated that you were willing to come out down here and do this for this community and for our community. So thank you all very much, and hopefully you could take something with this and make the world a little better place. So thank you, everybody, for coming.
Thank you for staying.
I did want to thank a few other people. Thank the panelists in the audience, of course, the Beaver Dam Area Community Theater. Thank you so much, David, back there. We appreciate that. WBEV Alejandro. I want to thank Greg, Richard for all the audio tonight, and Kale Zomer for technical assistance.
Craig.
And thank you. You're welcome. And the American Association of University Women. Thank you so much.